Good evening, everyone. Love. It's a word that carries the weight of our hopes, fears, and most vulnerable moments. We crave it, we fear losing it, and yet we often stumble over how to express it. Love is more than just a feeling. It's a language. And like any language, it's learned, shared, and practiced. Imagine a world where no one shared their true feelings, where every interaction was guarded, and every conversation was filtered through the lens of, what will they think of me? It's a lonely picture, isn't it? And yet many of us live this way without realizing it. We've been conditioned to believe that vulnerability, showing our true selves, flaws and all, is a weakness. But in reality, vulnerability is the cornerstone of connection. When we talk about love, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, we often focus on the outcomes: trust, intimacy, and closeness. But those outcomes don't just appear. They're built on moments of vulnerability. Vulnerability is the act of opening the door to your heart and saying, "This is me. I hope you'll accept what you see." It's the courage to be honest about your fears, your dreams, your mistakes, and your needs. Why is vulnerability so essential to connection? Because connection isn't about perfection, it's about authenticity. When we show up as our true selves, we give others permission to do the same. It's a powerful exchange. Think about the people you feel closest to in your life. Chances are they're the ones you've let see you at your most vulnerable. Whether it was crying over a heartbreak, admitting a failure, or sharing a secret dream you were scared to say out loud. But let's be honest, vulnerability is terrifying. It's the emotional equivalent of standing in front of someone without armor. The fear of rejection, judgment, or ridicule can make us want to run in the opposite direction. So we put up walls. We hide behind humor, busyness, or the pretense of having it all together. The problem is those walls don't just keep out pain, they also keep out love. When we shield ourselves from vulnerability, we disconnect not only from others, but also from our own emotions. Over time, this disconnection breeds loneliness and a sense of emptiness. Here's the paradox. The very thing we're most afraid of, being vulnerable, is the thing that creates the deep, meaningful relationships we crave. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. It's saying, I trust you enough to show you who I really am. And trust is the foundation of any connection. Take, for example, the simple yet profound act of apologizing. To say, I was wrong and I'm sorry, requires vulnerability. You're admitting a mistake and risking the possibility that the other person might not forgive you. But without that act of humility and honesty, relationships can't heal or grow. Vulnerability paves the way for reconciliation and deeper understanding. Or think about expressing love for the first time. Saying I love you is one of the most vulnerable things we do because we don't know if the other person feels the same way. It's a leap of faith. But without taking that risk, love remains unspoken and unrealized. So how do we embrace vulnerability in a world that often rewards toughness and self-reliance? Start small. You don't have to share your deepest secrets with everyone. Begin by being honest in small ways with a trusted friend, a partner, or even yourself. Reframe. Vulnerability, instead of seeing it as a risk, view it as an opportunity. Every time you open up, you're creating the possibility for connection and growth. Lean into discomfort. Vulnerability is uncomfortable, but that discomfort is a sign that you're stretching and growing. It's where the magic happens. Celebrate courage. Every act of vulnerability, no matter how small, is an act of bravery. Acknowledge and celebrate it. Finally, remember this. Vulnerability isn't about oversharing or being emotionally exposed for its own sake. It's about being real. It's about showing up, even when it's scary, because you believe in the power of connection. The root of connection isn't found in perfection or control. It's found in the messy, beautiful act of being human. Vulnerability is the bridge that connects hearts. And when we dare to cross it, we discover that we're not alone after all. Love often arrives in our lives wrapped in the guise of fairy tales and romantic movies. We grow up with the notion that when love is right, it's effortless, smooth, and magical. But real love, the kind that endures and grows, doesn't look like that. It isn't perfect. It isn't flawless. Real love is a practice, a daily commitment to show up, give your best, and work through the messy, complicated realities of life together. To say that love is practiced means acknowledging that it is an active, ongoing process. It's not a state you reach or a box you check. Love requires effort, attention, and care, not just when things are easy, but especially when they're hard. It's waking up every day and choosing to invest in the relationship, even when the glow of infatuation has faded or when disagreements arise. Let's think about it this way. No one expects to be an expert at playing the piano without years of practice. We don't expect to run a marathon without training or to master a language without study. And yet, when it comes to love, we often assume it should come naturally. If we struggle, we think something must be wrong. But love, like any meaningful pursuit, is a skill. It's learned through trial, error, and the willingness to grow. And the messiness of love. Real love is messy. It's forgetting an anniversary and making up for it with a heartfelt apology. It's arguing over something trivial, then laughing about it later because you both realize how ridiculous it was. It's learning how to communicate better, even when it feels easier to stay silent. Love doesn't thrive in the absence of conflict or mistakes. It thrives in the willingness to navigate those moments together. There's a beauty in the imperfections of love. Those moments when you fall short, but try again. When you misunderstand, but take the time to listen. When you feel distant, but work to reconnect. Love isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from it and using it as a stepping stone to grow closer. The practice of love in action. To practice love is to take action every day in ways big and small. But it's in the mundane gestures. Making your partner's favorite breakfast, sending a thoughtful text, or sitting beside them in silence when words aren't needed. It's in the hard conversations, addressing issues instead of sweeping them under the rug, expressing your needs without blaming, and listening with the intent to understand rather than respond. It's in showing up consistently, being there for someone, not just when it's convenient, but when they really need you, even if it's inconvenient. Practicing love also means learning how to apologize and forgive. No one gets it right all the time. We hurt each other, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes in the heat of the moment. Practicing love means saying, "I'm sorry," with sincerity and working to rebuild trust. It also means choosing to let go of resentment, not because it's easy, but because the relationship matters more than the offense. The myths of perfect love. One of the biggest barriers to practicing love is the myth of perfection. We've been sold the idea that the perfect partner will meet all our needs, understand us without us having to explain, and never let us down. But perfect love doesn't exist because perfect people don't exist. Love that's practiced, on the other hand, is about embracing imperfection. It's about saying, "I see your flaws and I still choose you." It's about being patient with your partner's quirks and shortcomings while also being kind to yourself about your own. Practicing love means accepting that both of you are works in progress and that the journey matters more than the destination. The role of intentionality. To practice love requires intentionality. It's easy to take love for granted, especially as time goes on. But love needs nurturing. Think of it as a garden. If you don't water it, pull the weeds, and tend to it regularly, it withers. Intentional love means making space for connection, whether that's through date nights, heartfelt conversations, or simply taking a moment to say, I appreciate you. Intentionality also means practicing love even when you don't feel like it. There will be days when you're tired, stressed, or irritated. On those days, love might look like choosing patience instead of snapping, offering a hug instead of retreating, or reminding yourself why you fell in love in the first place. Practicing love with yourself. Finally, practicing love isn't just about how we treat others, it's also about how we treat ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. When you practice self-love by setting boundaries, taking care of your mental and physical health, and speaking kindly to yourself, you model for others how you want to be loved. Conclusion. Love isn't a one-time achievement, it's a lifelong practice. It's not about finding the perfect partner or being the perfect person. It's about showing up day after day with a willingness to grow, learn, and choose love. Even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when it's imperfect. Practicing love is one of the most challenging and rewarding things we do as humans. It's not about getting it right every time, but about committing to the process. In the end, it's the effort, the persistence, and the heart we put into it that makes love so extraordinary. If love is a language, then empathy is the dialect that gives it depth and meaning. Empathy is more than just understanding another person's emotions. It's the ability to step into their world, feel their experiences as if they were your own, and let them know they are truly seen, heard, and valued. In relationships, empathy is the thread that weaves connection, healing, and trust. Without it, love can feel hollow, like a beautiful melody without harmony. Of the office own their pain and suffering. We often confuse empathy with sympathy. Sympathy looks at someone's pain and says, I'm sorry you're going through that. Empathy sits down beside them, looks them in the eye and says, I'm here with you. I feel your pain. Sympathy observes from a distance. Empathy bridges the gap. It's this active presence, this willingness to engage deeply with another's emotions that makes empathy the heart of love's dialect. The power of empathy and love. At its core, empathy is about connection. When you empathize with someone, you're telling them you're not alone. In love, this is profoundly powerful. It's easy to feel isolated in our struggles, even when we're surrounded by people who care about us. Empathy breaks down that wall of isolation and reminds us that we are supported, understood, and valued. Imagine a moment when you felt deeply understood by someone, when they didn't just hear your words, but truly got what you were feeling. How did that make you feel? Seen, loved, accepted? That's the magic of empathy. It has the power to transform a relationship because it fosters a sense of safety. When we know someone is willing to meet us where we are without judgment, we feel free to be our true selves. Empathy in action. Empathy isn't just a concept, it's a practice, and it shows up in many ways in our relationships. 1, listening without judgment. Empathy starts with listening. Not the kind of listening where you're already formulating your response, but active listening. It's the kind of listening where you're fully present, paying attention to not just the words, but also the tone, body language, and emotions behind them. Sometimes the best way to show love is to simply listen. Not to fix, not to advise, but to hold space for someone to share what they're feeling. In those moments, your presence is the gift. 2, validating emotions. One of the most empathetic things you can do is validate someone's feelings. This doesn't mean you have to agree with their perspective, but it does mean acknowledging that their emotions are real and valid. Phrases like, "That sounds really hard," or "I can see why you'd feel that way," can make a world of difference. Validation tells the other person, "I see you and your feelings matter." It's a simple yet profound way to communicate love. 3, stepping into their shoes. Empathy asks us to imagine what it feels like to walk in someone else's shoes. This requires humility and curiosity. Instead of assuming we know what they're going through, we ask questions. What's been hardest for you about this? How are you feeling right now? What can I do to support you? By seeking to understand their perspective, we deepen our connection and show that we value their experience. 4, offering comfort, not solutions. When someone we love is hurting, our instinct is often to fix the problem. But empathy isn't about solving. It's about being present. Sometimes what a person needs most isn't a solution, but a shoulder to lean on, a hand to hold, or a simple, "I'm here for you." Empathy recognizes that it's not about having the perfect words or answers. It's about showing up with compassion and care. The challenges of empathy. Empathy isn't always easy. It requires us to slow down, put aside our own perspective, and be fully present with another person. In moments of stress or conflict, this can feel especially challenging. 1, overcoming defensiveness. When someone shares feelings that involve us, hurt, disappointment, or frustration, our instinct can be to defend ourselves. But empathy asks us to resist that urge and focus instead on their experience. It's not about agreeing or taking blame, it's about acknowledging their feelings and making space for them. 2, avoiding emotional overload. Empathy can feel overwhelming, especially when we care deeply about someone. It's important to remember that empathy doesn't mean taking on their pain as our own. It's about being present with their feelings, not absorbing them. Setting boundaries and practicing self-care ensures that we can continue to show up empathetically without burning out. The role of empathy in conflict. Conflict is an inevitable part of any relationship, but empathy is what turns conflict into growth. When both parties approach a disagreement with empathy, the focus shifts from who's right to how can we understand each other better. In moments of conflict, empathy looks like taking a deep breath before responding to ensure your words come from a place of care, not anger. Saying, "Help me understand where you're coming from," instead of jumping to conclusions. Acknowledging the other person's feelings, even if you see things differently. Empathy transforms conflict because it centers the relationship rather than the problem. It reminds us that we're on the same team, working toward understanding and resolution. Empathy and self-love. Empathy isn't just about how we treat others, it's also about how we treat ourselves. Self-compassion is a form of empathy directed inward. When we're kind to ourselves, when we acknowledge our struggles without judgment and give ourselves the grace to be imperfect, we strengthen our ability to extend that same empathy to others. In conclusion, Empathy is the bridge between two hearts. It's the act of saying, I see you, I feel with you, and I'm here for you. In the dialect of love, empathy is the most powerful tool we have for fostering connection, healing wounds, and deepening intimacy. When we practice empathy, we're not just speaking the language of love, we're living it. Empathy transforms relationships because it's rooted in the truth that we all long to be understood. And when we offer that understanding to others, we create a space where love can truly thrive. At the heart of every meaningful relationship lies a simple truth. Intimacy cannot exist without authenticity. Authenticity is the act of showing up as your true self, unfiltered and unmasked. It's about being real, honest, about who you are, what you feel, and what you need. When we let go of the need to perform, pretend, or perfect, we create space for the kind of intimacy that transforms relationships and brings genuine connection. But authenticity is easier said than done. It requires courage. In a world that often rewards appearances and conformity, being authentic can feel like a risk. It's the emotional equivalent of standing in front of someone without armor, exposing the parts of yourself you'd rather hide. And yet, it's only in that raw honesty that intimacy can truly flourish. The connection between authenticity and intimacy. Intimacy thrives on trust, and trust is built on truth. When we're authentic, we're saying to the other person, this is who I am. No masks, no filters. I trust you with the real me. That trust invites them to do the same, creating a mutual openness that deepens the relationship. When we're inauthentic, whether by hiding parts of ourselves, pretending to be something we're not, or saying what we think others want to hear, we create distance. Even if the other person doesn't consciously recognize the inauthenticity, they'll sense something is off. True intimacy can't exist when there's a wall, even an invisible one, between two people. Authenticity also fosters emotional safety, which is essential for intimacy. When we're authentic, we signal to others that it's okay to be themselves. We model vulnerability, and in doing so, we create a space where they feel safe to open up as well. Why authenticity is challenging? If authenticity is so essential, why is it so difficult? Because it requires us to confront our deepest fears. Like fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. Many of us grow up learning that certain parts of ourselves aren't acceptable. Maybe we were told we were too sensitive, too loud, too quiet, or too much. So we learn to hide those parts, presenting only the version of ourselves we think others will approve of. Over time, this habit of hiding becomes second nature, and we lose touch with our authentic selves. In relationships, this fear of rejection can make us hesitant to be fully honest. We worry that if we show our true selves, our flaws, insecurities, and vulnerabilities will be rejected. So we wear masks, hoping to be loved for the image we project. But the love we receive for a facade never feels real, because deep down we know they're not loving the real us. Authenticity in action. Practicing authenticity in relationships doesn't mean oversharing or laying everything bare all at once. It's about being honest, intentional, and willing to show up as your true self over time. 1, knowing yourself. Authenticity begins with self-awareness. You can't be authentic if you don't know who you are. Take the time to reflect on your values, needs, and emotions. What matters most to you? What are your fears and dreams? The more you understand yourself, the easier it is to show up authentically. 2, speaking your truth. Being authentic means expressing your thoughts, feelings, and needs honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. This doesn't mean being blunt or unkind. It means sharing your truth with compassion. For example, Instead of saying, "You never listen to me," try, "I feel unheard when we talk, and I need us to work on communication." Speaking your truth invites deeper understanding and fosters intimacy because it shows you're willing to be vulnerable. And 3, embracing imperfection. Authenticity isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. This means acknowledging your mistakes, insecurities, and flaws without shame. When you say, "I'm sorry I messed up," or "I'm struggling with this right now," you create opportunities for connection. No one is perfect, and pretending to be only creates pressure and distance. When you embrace your imperfections, you give others permission to do the same, strengthening the bond between you. Letting go of people pleasing. Authenticity often requires setting boundaries and saying no when necessary. People pleasing is the opposite of authenticity. It's shaping yourself to fit others' expectations at the expense of your own needs. True intimacy can't exist when one person is constantly suppressing their own desires to keep the peace. By being honest about what you can and can't do, you show respect for yourself and the relationship. The rewards of authenticity. When we practice authenticity, we invite a deeper level of intimacy into our relationships. Instead of superficial connections, we experience relationships built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Deeper emotional connection. Authenticity allows us to connect on a soul level. When we share our true selves, we give others the opportunity to see and love us for who we really are. Mutual growth. Authentic relationships challenge us to grow. They provide a safe space to explore, learn, and evolve, knowing we're supported by someone who values us as we are. Liberation from pretense. Living authentically is freeing. It removes the pressure of maintaining a facade and allows us to relax into the comfort of being ourselves. This liberation enhances intimacy because it creates an atmosphere of trust and ease. So you'll resilience in conflict. Authenticity strengthens relationships by fostering honesty during difficult times. When we're authentic, we address issues openly instead of sweeping them under the rug, leading to healthier and more resilient relationships. Authenticity and self-love. Authenticity in relationships starts with authenticity in our relationship with ourselves. When we accept and love ourselves for who we are, we no longer feel the need to hide. Self-love is the foundation that allows us to show up authentically in our relationships. Conclusion. Authenticity unlocks true intimacy because it's the gateway to being known and loved for who we really are. It's the courage to say, "This is me," and the willingness to let others respond however they will. Authenticity may be risky, but it's also the only path to the deep, meaningful connections we crave. When we embrace authenticity, we open the door to a kind of love that is real, resilient, and deeply fulfilling. It's not about being perfect, it's about being true. And in that truth, we find the intimacy that transforms relationships and makes us feel truly alive. As we've explored today, love is a language that thrives on vulnerability, empathy, authenticity, and practice. These are not abstract ideals, but intentional choices we make every day, choices to show up, to be seen, to listen, and to grow together. At its core, love is not about perfection. It's about connection. It's not about always getting it right, but about being willing to try, to stumble, and to keep going. Love asks us to lean into the discomfort of being real and the courage to embrace the messiness of relationships, because that's where the magic happens. The secret language of love isn't really a secret at all. It's a commitment to show up fully with all our imperfections and to invite others to do the same. It's about choosing connection over comfort, truth over pretense, and growth over fear. So, as you leave here today, I encourage you to embrace love in its truest form, not as a destination, but as a journey. Dare to be vulnerable, practice empathy, and live authentically. And most of all, remember that love is not something we fall into. It's something we create, nurture, and choose every single day. Because in the end, the secret language of love is spoken not with words, but with how we show up for one another, with open hearts, open minds, and the courage to love deeply and without reservation. Thank you.